please describe how QE only really increases asset prices and not M1 supplies unless it's injected via helicopter money. Okay, so Aaron, when they do quantitative easing, they meaning the Fed, they are buying assets from the banks themselves. So how do they buy those assets? They meaning the Fed. They create bank reserves and they do what Snyder calls an asset swap. So if that bank has treasuries or mortgage-backed securities, the Fed prints up bank reserves, gives the bank those additional reserves, and then they take the treasuries or the mortgage-backed securities. So the only difference is instead of having mortgage-backed securities or treasuries, the bank as an asset on their balance sheet now just has bank reserves. So you got to start by understanding that's the only thing that changes. That's the only difference. So the next question becomes, okay, what do the banks do with those bank reserves that they couldn't otherwise do with maybe treasuries or mortgage-backed securities that could have the effect of increasing the stock market, let's say? Well, it just gives them additional balance sheet capacity to extend more loans than they otherwise could have. So they're going to look around for entities to lend money to with the most skewed, let's call it risk reward, with the most favorable risk reward. In the past, that was finding an entrepreneur who had a profitable business model and extending them loans so they could grow their business. But since 2008, most of you guys that are paying attention, I'm sure, know that the banks don't really fund businesses anymore. They don't fund productivity. They don't fund the growth or the increase of a society producing more goods and services at an ever efficient rate. So what do? Well, they look around and say, okay, well, how can we make a bigger return with less downside? Aha, we think that there's a Fed put. So if we just increase our balance sheet by increasing loans, let's say, and give those loans to hedge funds, well, we're definitely going to get paid back because the hedge funds will never lose money, because the Fed won't let them lose money because they don't want the market to go down. There's a Fed put. If these hedge funds or financial institutions know what they're doing, then we're definitely going to get repaid. So you see balance sheet capacity being used to create loans that increase asset prices instead of creating loans that increase the amount of goods and services that are being produced by a society. So who is kind of picking up the slack? That would be the venture capitalist funds, right? So they get all this money because the pensions can no longer get the 7% yield they need. So they take all of their billions and billions, give them to the VCs and say, guys, get us that 7% return we need. And the VCs look around and they say, well, shoot, we're just like the banks. We don't see anyone we could fund. We don't see any entrepreneurs out there that have a good, profitable business model that we could give them capital and they could grow their model, take it public, and we could make a big return. There's not that many people out there relative to the amount of money that we now have under management, because we've just been bombarded with capital from all these pension funds because the Fed dropped interest rates so low they can't get a return, right? So they have to go further out the risk curve. That's why the VCs have so much more money. But those VCs are competing for the same amount of good entrepreneurs that have profitable businesses. I would argue the amount has gone down since 2008. So they have an even less pool, or they have an even smaller pool of entrepreneurs with good, profitable businesses to choose from. So what do? They invent businesses. I know what we'll do. We'll start funding businesses based on there's some sort of acronym for it, like total addressable market size or something like that. And so we'll just create these stories and we'll get these CEOs that are very charismatic, and we'll get these CFOs that don't really mind cooking the books and coming up with all these alternate ways of looking at accounting other than GAAP, generally accepted accounting principles. So they just kind of look the other way, and next thing you know, you get all this community adjusted EBITDA, like they had in WeWork, which is basically just taking all their expenses off the P&L out and just adding it back as goodwill or something like that, to where it somehow made them look profitable. And then you have the same thing going on in Japan, where they are dumping all their money. They can't get a return there either. So they're dumping all their money into SoftBank, and they just fund WeWork, or they fund DoorDash or Uber or Lyft, or just fill in the blank for any of these companies that don't make a profit at all. So anyway, that's you get my point, right? So you got to start by understanding the only thing the Fed can do is create bank reserves. That's it, as of right now. And I think that's going to change really quick. We saw it change back in March, but that's a whole other tangent that I could go off on. So it starts by understanding that. Then the banks, they look around, they have extra balance sheet capacity. They don't want to lend it to entrepreneurs. They think it's better risk reward to lend it to hedge funds and financial institutions that are going to drive up the stock market. That's going to bring in retail as well. The Fed's going to do their job by making everyone believe there's a Fed put. And then it's just this, it's this feedback loop that just takes the stock market higher and higher and higher. While in the meantime, it really kind of has this effect of gutting the real economy, because that capital isn't going into the creation of manufacturing and actually creating stuff. That it's just going into financializing the economy. But at the end of the day, the economy is only as wealthy as the goods and services it creates. A measurement of the wealth of an economy isn't how many green pieces of paper there are. That doesn't make us wealthy. What makes us wealthy is the goods and services. And if we're creating fewer and fewer and fewer and fewer profitable businesses that create goods and services, we are getting poorer as a society. And people might look around and say, George, well, look at all these amazing businesses that have come up since 2008. Yeah, name one that makes profit. Sure, there's a couple, but I mean, I read a statistic the other day that, and I think I used it in one of my videos. It was like 70 or 80% of the IPOs, so the businesses that have gone public in like 2019 and 2020, are not making a profit. So, I mean, listen, in my book, you're not a business until you can actually make a profit, because a business isn't a business, in my opinion, unless it's sustainable. A business that is just churning money, that's a Ponzi scheme. That's not a business. So yeah, we've created a lot of Ponzi schemes for sure, but I don't think that's made us any richer. I think in the long run, it's made us poorer. And at some point, it's going to be time to pay the fiddler. Is that point in 2 months or 10 years? I don't know. I think all we can do is analyze the fundamentals of the economy and be red-pilled, for lack of a better word, about the economic environment that we live in. And therefore, hopefully, we can make better decisions for ourselves and our families over the long run based on the probabilities. But you can't you can't even guess as to what the probabilities may be of XYZ outcome unless you're educated, unless you watch live streams like this and podcasts like Micro Voices and watch Real Vision and watch Making Sense by Jeff Snyder. You guys got to do that, and then you can have a better chance of making good, educated decisions.